Welcome back, everybody. We're diving into some ancient regulations today,
Oh, yeah.
specifically Leviticus chapter 22 from the King James Bible.
Oh, okay.
Get ready for some surprisingly specific rules about,
Sure.
well, who could eat holy food and what kind of animals they could offer as sacrifices back then.
This is a really fascinating chapter. It gives us a great look at this
Yeah.
idea of ritual purity in ancient Israel.
Okay.
And it lets us kind of peek into this carefully defined relationship between the Israelites and their God.
So let's start with that idea of ritual purity.
Right.
The text says that priests couldn't just eat any of the holy food if they were considered unclean.
Right.
But this wasn't about, like, just being physically dirty.
No, not at all. It was a totally different way of thinking about cleanliness.
Okay.
It was more about spiritual wholeness.
Interesting.
Yeah. And symbolic separation from things that were considered profane.
I see.
For the Israelites, this idea of purity was absolutely central to maintaining a right relationship with God.
So what kind of things could make someone ritually unclean?
Well, let's see.
The text mentions touching a dead body, skin conditions, even, seminal emissions.
Right.
It's kind of a fascinating mix of things that we might consider, pretty mundane today.
Oh, it definitely is.
Yeah.
It is. But you have to remember,
Mm-hmm.
for the Israelites, each of these things represented a kind of symbolic boundary crossing,
Okay.
like moving away from the sacred. And priests, remember, they acted as these intermediaries between the people and God.
Yeah.
So maintaining this state of ritual purity, it was essential to their role.
It makes sense.
It wasn't about punishment. It was about upholding the sanctity of their position
Right.
and the rituals they performed.
Now, this idea of who was allowed to eat holy food,
Yeah.
it gets even more interesting when you look at who was excluded.
Okay.
So strangers and hired servants couldn't partake.
Ah.
But the text specifically says a priest could buy a slave, and then that slave would be allowed to eat the food.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
That detail, I know, it might seem a little jarring to us today,
Yeah.
but it really speaks volumes about the social structure back then.
Okay.
Bringing a slave into your household, it wasn't just like a transaction.
Mm-hmm.
It brought that person under the same roof.
Right.
And in a way, under the same ritual umbrella as the priest.
I see.
It's a good reminder that these rules, they were deeply intertwined with their everyday lives
Yeah.
and their social hierarchies.
Then there's the case of a priest's divorced daughter.
Oh, right.
She had to return to her father's house to be allowed to eat the holy food again.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how these regulations, they weren't just about individual purity, and also reflected family dynamics and social structures.
Absolutely. The chapter really emphasizes how deeply woven these ideas of ritual purity were
Yeah.
into every aspect of Israelite life, from individual actions to family relationships, everything.
Let's shift gears a bit now. Talk about the rules surrounding animal sacrifices.
Right.
Reading through Leviticus, I was struck by how incredibly specific
Yeah.
the regulations were for the animals themselves.
Yes, absolutely.
The Israelites believed that only the very best
Right.
was fit for offering to God.
Exactly.
And this is definitely reflected in these strict standards that are outlined in Leviticus.
Mhm.
It wasn't just a matter of picking any random animal from the flock.
No, not at all.
So what were some of these standards?
Okay, so
What made an animal suitable, to sacrifice?
the text is very clear. The animal had to be a male
Okay.
and without blemish.
So, like, perfect.
Perfect. Anything less than perfect. Blind, injured, diseased was just not acceptable.
Wow.
And this emphasis on physical perfection, it was a way of demonstrating reverence, right?
Okay, yeah.
Recognizing God's own wholeness and perfection. And it's interesting.
Yeah.
This idea of offering unblemished animals, it wasn't unique to the Israelites.
Oh, really?
No, we actually see similar concepts in other ancient religions as well.
That's really interesting.
It is.
And I noticed the text
Yeah.
makes a distinction between acceptable animals for different types of offerings.
Right.
It says an animal with, say, a missing ear or like extra toes
Uh-huh.
might be fine for a free will offering,
Yeah.
but not for a vow offering.
Yeah.
Why the distinction?
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
To understand this, we need to think about the cultural weight of vows in ancient Israel.
Okay.
Breaking a vow was a very serious matter.
Uh-huh.
It was a transgression against God.
I see.
So when you made a vow, the offering had to be absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
It reflected how serious the promise you were making was.
Okay.
A free will offering.
Right.
While still a gesture of devotion, didn't carry quite that same weighty obligation.
Interesting.
So it allowed for a little more flexibility.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool how these seemingly small details give us such a rich look into the cultural and religious landscape of ancient Israel.
It's true. And there's another detail that caught my eye.
Yeah.
The text says you couldn't even offer a blemished animal as a gift from a foreigner.
Right.
It had to be perfect,
Yeah.
and it had to be Israelite.
That's a really good point. This just reinforces the idea that sacrifices, they weren't just about the act itself.
Right.
It was about the intention behind it.
Okay.
And closely following these specific regulations
Yeah.
is all about maintaining that distinct identity as God's chosen people
Mm-hmm.
and upholding the sanctity of their covenant with him.
So we've talked about these rules for priests and purity and these very precise rules for animal sacrifices.
Yeah.
What's the overarching theme here,
Right.
What do you think Leviticus 22 is ultimately trying to get across?
Well, when you look at the chapter as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
I think it really comes down to honoring the divine,
Okay.
not just through your actions,
Yeah.
but also your intentions.
It's about approaching the sacred with that sense of reverence and respect, both in how you present yourself and what you're offering.
Right. And neglecting these rules had serious consequences.
Really.
Oh, yeah. Breaking these rules, it wasn't just some minor slip-up.
Mm.
It was seen as profaning God's name, a very serious offense for them.
There's a powerful verse at the end of the chapter that really gets this idea across.
You're talking about verse 32.
Yes.
Neither shall ye profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am the Lord which hallow you.
It's a stark reminder of the weight and responsibility that came with interacting with the sacred,
Yeah.
in this ancient context.
It makes you wonder if there are any parallels we can draw to our lives today.
It's easy to just dismiss these rules as outdated and irrelevant to our modern world,
Uh-huh.
but I think there's something timeless about this focus on intentionality and respect.
Yeah, I agree.
Even if it shows up differently in our lives.
Right,
What are the sacrifices we make today?
right.
Our time, energy, attention.
Exactly.
Are we offering our best, or are we just going through the motions?
It's something to really think about.
Yeah, especially in a world that's constantly pulling us in so many different directions.
Right?
Are we approaching our lives, our work, our relationships with that same intentionality and respect that we see back in Leviticus?
Absolutely.
It's definitely something to think about.
It is. It really is.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into Leviticus chapter 22.
Yes, it does.
Hope you found it insightful
Yeah.
and maybe even a little challenging.
For sure.
It definitely gave me some new things to think about.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's always fascinating to look at these ancient texts
Yeah,
and see how they can still resonate with us after all these years.
absolutely. And for our listeners out there who are ready to go a little deeper,
Mhm.
we've got a final thought for you.
Yep.
You didn't really touch on this in the text, but
Okay.
what does it mean to hallow God's name in a modern context?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Does it mean upholding certain moral standards? Possibly.
Acting with compassion and kindness,
Maybe.
finding ways to make our daily lives more sacred.
Could be. There's no single right answer, of course,
Of course not.
but it's definitely something worth reflecting on
It is.
as you go about your week.
Yeah.
So with that, we'll conclude our look at Leviticus chapter 22.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, it's always rewarding to really dig into these old texts
Yeah.
and see how they can still speak to us today, thousands of years later.
I think that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating.
Yeah.
Finding these unexpected connections between the past and present,
Uh-huh.
realizing that maybe we're not so different from those who came before us.
I completely agree.
It's like this reminder that even though times change and contexts change,
Yeah.
human nature, our search for meaning, that stays the same.
Yeah, pretty much.
So to our listeners out there,
Yeah.
if you're intrigued by these ideas of ritual purity and intentionality,
Mm-hmm.
think about how they might show up in your own life. Right, like what do you consider sacred?
Exactly.
How do you approach those things,
With reverence.
with respect?
Yeah.
Maybe it's about being more mindful of your choices,
Okay.
the actions you take,
Yeah.
recognizing the impact they have.
Or maybe it's about cultivating gratitude,
Yeah, that's a good one.
appreciating the blessings in your life, both big and small,
Absolutely.
whatever it looks like for you.
Right.
I think the main takeaway from Leviticus 22 is this:
But
approaching life with intentionality, approaching life with a sense of the sacred, and maybe just maybe, if we do that,
Yeah.
we can find a deeper connection to something bigger than ourselves.
That's a great point.
That's a good note to leave our listeners with.
It is.
So on that note,
Yeah.
that wraps up our deep dive into Leviticus chapter 22.
It does. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
We hope you found this deep dive enlightening and thought-provoking.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning,
Keep diving deep.
and we'll see you on the next deep dive.